someone just threw a package on our front porch. That will stop. That will stop shortly. Literally threw it. I could hear it hit a thump when it hit the front porch. I've long held the belief that success in training for Barkley is actually enhanced with living in a place like British Columbia or Scotland or somewhere that has some really nasty, wet winter seasons to deal with. And I always considered that kind of an advantage versus, I don't know, I haven't lived and trained in like Arizona as an example, but I think you just get hardened a little bit more over the winter months training in a cold, wet environment that prepares you mentally and physically for that race.
Would you count Jared in that mix too, like having done like Granger Peak through like all those Salt Lake winters?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, yeah, great to have you here. I think the first question that I want to ask as it pertains like directly to Jasmine, and I feel like very few people know this as well as you, like when you think about how Barkley has changed over the years from a strategy standpoint, like a course strategy, camp strategy standpoint, what has that evolution looked like in terms of how dialed you need to be arriving and departing camp, stuff like that?
Yeah, it'd been a couple of years for me between visits to the park, and I loved being there last year, crewing for John and really getting to see the changes. And it's more of like an F1 stop between laps now. And it wasn't that wasn't the case previously. I mean, you would go to your campsite. It didn't matter if your campsite wasn't right next to the gate. You would get 15 kind of minutes to safely work with in between laps. But what happens when you can make these really subtle changes to a course like that you multiply by 5? I mean, you add a 10-minute hill, that's almost an hour. Add a 12-minute hill, that is an hour of addition, right? It's that easy, that simple to make this course so challenging. So when you keep pushing it to the margins, it makes sense that you eliminate the ability for anybody to relax between laps. And crews are right at the gate and runners are coming in and having to get out of there as quick as they can. And for me, looking at it from the sidelines, that's just such a mental hurdle and challenge that maybe goes underappreciated. The fact that you don't get a break, you don't get like to step away from it for just like 10 minutes. Like I really needed that when I was doing that race. I really needed to let my mind relax for 10 or 15 minutes between laps. But now it's boom, at the gate, your crew is there, you're getting changed as quick as you can, and you're getting right back out there again because you don't have any time to burn, and completely a luxury if you get a chance to sleep at all these days too.
So the course is that much harder 5 or 6 years on? Like Laz has, like the step functions have increased that much?
Well, I don't know, having not been on the course, but what I can say for certain is like 2 years ago, I think, I had some insight into the changes that were made. And it was very obvious that the changes were a little bit drastic and that it was the outcome matched the assessment that many had as to the magnitude of the alterations. And then those were peeled back a little bit because it was obvious that like there was too much additional vertical and struggle added to the race. So it is, I mean, one incredible thing about the Barkley is how precise they need to be to design a course that is not only doable, but doable in that 2% range, in that 58 to 60 hour range. It's a bit of a project on their end to nail that every year.
I'd love for you to recount what has become, I believe, the famous lap 4 to 5 transition, the interaction, not just between Jared and Jasmine, but also between you and Jared, and sort of Jared going back to Jasmine to have another conversation. Get as much into the weeds as you can about the dialogue there, like what you were hearing standing on the sidelines, how you got involved, stuff like that.
So again, I had the pleasure of being there on the sidelines for the entirety of the race. And when Jasmine came in to make the transition from 4 to 5, it was nighttime, it was dark, and she was slightly ahead of Jared, and she was being crewed at the gate, and her husband was her crew. And there was a very noticeable conversation about, if you go next, you get clockwise, which is the preferred direction, especially at that point in the race. And the reason clockwise is the preferred direction is your capture points for your books are your handles are larger. You have more room for error on clockwise than you do on counterclockwise. Finding the books counterclockwise is more complicated, and a small miss can become a really big miscounter. whereas clockwise, you have a little bit more margin for error as you're navigating your way through the course. This is essentially a known thing. And they were trying to hurry to get Jasmine out before Jared, who went down to his campsite with his wife, was coming up to head back out on the course. And then if someone went ahead of Jasmine, that being Jared, she was going to go counter, which was a harder lap direction. And Jared came up, and it was obvious that Jasmine wasn't quite ready to go. And Jared wanted to see Jasmine finish as much as anybody. And in a very incredibly kind, wholehearted gesture, just simply asked if Jasmine wanted to go clockwise. And Jasmine is British, Scottish, and I am Eastern Canadian, and I speak British. I'm part of the Commonwealth, and I very much understand how Brits operate. And she basically said, "No, I'm good," and was not going to ask for that because it's just not the way that they culturally operate. And Jared didn't recognize this and had offered, and it hadn't been received, and he was, I think, basically getting ready to head out. And I just called him over real quick and I said, "Hey, she absolutely wants clockwise. She's not going to ask for it. I think if you hang out for a sec, she'll appreciate it and she'll get out real quick." And he was like, "Okay, cool, thanks." And he walked back out and basically said as much, where he was like, "Hey, I'm in no rush. I'm going to hang out for a minute, and whenever you're ready, you can grab clockwise." And she did, and history was made. And I think the main thing here is that Jared was absolutely doing this of his own volition and wanted to do that, and offered it up. And whether he would have hung out and waited and recognized that moment or not, I don't know. But I just wanted to make sure that a miscommunication didn't occur, and that Jasmine wasn't forced to go counter when she really didn't want to go counter.
For people that are looking at this from afar and maybe they aren't as attuned to what I would call the culture of Barkley, the spirit of Barkley, how should the general public judge this level of cooperation between runners at that stage of the event?
I mean, if you can't step back and understand what a magnificent human moment that is for people to have forged a connection over during impossible circumstances in a race that, as we know, over decades has seen a handful of finishers and never seen a female finisher. I mean, you should be viewing that through a singular lens, and that is, it's incredible the mutual respect that is shared by those who are fortunate enough to toe that line together.
At that moment in the transition, did you believe heading out on lap 5 that Jasmine had a shot? Like realistically, what was going through your mind about her chances and why?
So I absolutely believed that Jasmine was going to do it. And even as day broke and we were getting splits out on course, and when she was about halfway through the lap, there was a report that she was basically behind schedule and might miss by a little bit. And I will actually, like, I start feeling emotional just thinking about this because because I lived it, and I know the the unique ability for body and mind to connect and allow adrenaline to fuel in moments of impossibility. And when Jasmine left on 5, I knew she had a shot, and I saw her level of mental wherewithal at that point. I could see that she was as deep as you're gonna be 4 laps in, but wasn't fried, wasn't losing her mental capacities, which is a big thing when you're having to navigate in the dark at night, obviously. When she left, I believed wholeheartedly that she would. And then most importantly, when we got splits and I had heard that she needed to close from the fire tower to the finish on 5 faster than she had on 3, I knew where she would have been emotionally and physically and mentally in that moment. And the reality is that all of your your senses and your body and your mind that are telling you to shut down and wanting you to stop get completely severed and shut off, because you recognize that you've been working at this for years and you have a unique opportunity in that moment to go to a place you've never gone to before, physically and mentally, because it's never been demanded of you. And the consequences of not stepping into that are so severe, in that you would miss by a small margin, that I knew she would find the necessary willpower to push through everything to get herself to that finish line by that 60-hour cutoff. And I got to tell you, like, being on that sideline and watching that happen, it goes down as one of the greatest sports events of my life. And I've been to like Stanley Cup Finals games and seen overtime wins, and like I put it in that same slot of like big professional sporting events. For me, it was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen firsthand.
I feel like you've already answered most of this next question, but can you help people understand the portion of her accomplishment as it relates to those last 3 to 4 hours of the race? Like when she's leaving the tower around Ratjaw and whatever, there's like 3:40 left on the clock. Can you help people understand the gravity of that final stretch and her just even arriving back close to the campground?
When she gets to Ratjaw and is a handful of books away from reaching the finish line of Barkley with all of her pages, but also understands that she's not going to make it in under 60 hours at the pace that she's been moving, a choice has to be made. And I've done a lot of stuff over the years, and a lot of hard things and expedition races, but what is unique about the Barkley and why people do tend to go back and fall in love with it is what it demands of you in those moments, which has never been extracted from you in any other moment in life or an event that you've been a part of. And in that moment, it is absolutely impossible, and you know it in your bones. You know wholeheartedly, conclusively, that what you're asking yourself to do with that time range, that time limit, is completely impossible, and you accept that, and then you find a reserve that you've never tapped into before, because you understand that if you don't, then you've got to start all over again, and you've worked years to put yourself in this position to give yourself 3.5 hours, where you need the best 3.5 hours physically that you've ever been able to extract from your core. And you find a way to do it, because the consequence of reaching that finish line over time is you go right back to starting from square one. And that is what allows someone to override everything that tells them that it is impossible, even though you know it's impossible to make it in that time frame.
You know, you just sort of already started to talk about it, but one of the things that you and Jasmine share in common is this resolve year over year to come back and to keep giving it another shot, even, you know, after serving up a pretty impressive performance. Her with the fun run and getting onto lap 4. And I mean, you on 2 occasions being so close on lap 5, in one case 6 seconds. One thing we've talked about with Jasmine and other guests, people like Courtney Dauwalter, Amelia Boone, is just like the gravity of coming back year after year, and whether there's like a mental toll there or like a sense of futility. Can you speak to that experience too, of just like knowing that the next year you have to go back to that park and put yourself through that whole experience again?
Yeah, it doesn't get easier. Year one for me, when I got to lap 5 and was with Jared for 4 laps, was just perfect ignorant bliss. And you just don't know. I remember coming down on the 3rd lap of Barkley and not understanding how it was possible. That was the moment for me in my first ever Barkley of like, holy shit, this is so much more than I thought it was. I'm 3 laps in, and I can legitimately say this is harder than any 100 miler I've ever done in my whole life. That moment of being like, how do I do 2 more laps of this? And I remember that year spending 20 minutes in my head basically telling myself I could do it until I actually started to believe I could do it, because just getting through 3 laps took more out of me than any 100 miler that I had ever done anywhere ever. So when you know that going in, it does make it harder, because again, the ignorant bliss is kind of nice when you don't have this lived experience of how bad and miserable it can get. It can certainly lead to going all in on training and doing everything you can to try to rewrite the result there. But someone had said to me, I think it was Frozen Ed, that he thought that there was that 3 years was the sweet spot. And that if you don't get your best result after 3 years, it's really challenging for people to stick with it after that. And there's a truth in that. 100% there's a truth in that. And this is a personal thing. This has nothing to do with your documentary, but like, the pandemic is what took it out of me in the end, and missing 2 more years and one after, like, literally the border shut down after my last training run a couple of weeks out. So it was a 5-6 year period for me before I just had to move on from it. And it is really challenging to continue to find the motivation for it. And the reason, I think, is that it takes almost everything to prepare yourself for it. And there's so much sacrifice that goes into the 3, 5, 6, and 12 months before each Barkley, that it's really challenging. It's really difficult to justify that annually.
I think and I think you're spot on. I think from what I can recall, because I was just reading Alexis Berg's book, the only outlier is Andrew Thompson. I think he actually went back 10 times.
Yeah, Andrew. I know Andrew. Absolutely. And Andrew was someone I connected with before I had ever gone to Barkley. Legend. And yeah, it's exceptional. And the thing that he had going for him was that he did start a little bit younger, so he had that 10-year window to work with. But absolutely, it is phenomenal to stick with it for that long, and to finally get that finish is just incredible.
I'd love to hear your perspective on just like the year-over-year recurring narrative about this not being a race for women, and for the women that do show up, it's a futile quest, right? Like, they're there and let's celebrate the fun runs and maybe lap 4 attempts, but like 5 laps is out of the cards. We even heard it around camp last year, like from people who run the numbers, that it's just, don't even entertain the question. How are you thinking about it? Because you've shared the event with women before, so curious to get your thoughts.
I knew this would happen. I just knew it was a matter of time. And I knew it was a matter of time until the right person, the right woman, got inspired enough by the race. I think there are a bunch of women that can absolutely finish the Barkley Marathons. But the problem is the Barkley Marathons is a puzzle, and it's very unlikely that someone is going to finish the first time they show up. So what you need someone with exceptional talent who also is wired a little bit uniquely to be like, I want to figure this specific puzzle out. I want to add my name to this roster of finishers. I want this on my resume. And Jasmine was the person that finally stepped up and obviously had the skill set and dedicated herself by going back multiple times to figure out that puzzle to get herself to the finish line. And it can absolutely be replicated, but I think that's the reason we hadn't seen a female finisher, and the reason we might not see another female finisher in the years to come immediately, is that the women with the skill set to do so really kind of need to sacrifice a couple of years to give themselves a legitimate chance at it. And that doesn't really speak to everybody, and rightfully so. So I always knew we would see a female finisher. I always thought the taunting was a way of trying to entice and inspire, for a lack of a better word, some women to come out and kind of fight against that narrative. And just, again, the fact that I actually got to witness it firsthand myself, I just feel so incredibly fortunate.
One thing you said there that was interesting, like if you think about the buy-in required to even put yourself in a position to maybe be successful at Barkley, are you suggesting that to do it right, you have to clear the deck almost like 9 to 12 months in advance and like completely solely focus on this thing and kind of do events that are similar to it, stuff like that? Like, is it that much commitment up front?
For most, not for all. I mean, you do see people like John Kelly. I mean, John races everywhere all the time. Jared can show up at Barkley on a whim because it just agrees with how he lives his life day to day. But the majority of people who are trying to make it to lap 5 really need to rework their life and lifestyle for at least 6 months, like at least 6. And for me, it became a 12-month endeavor for years where, you know, every decision I made for multiple years was about trying to extract a finish and find success at that race.
And maybe this is self-evident, maybe it's more complex, but what do you believe Jasmine's legacy at this race and for this sport is?
I think Jasmine is just getting started. And it's not like Barkley is even, I mean, it's right there in like her top 3, I guess, but I mean, she's been doing exceptional things, and better than most or all of the men for many years now. Her legacy will be this, though. It will be, there's only one first. She was and will always forever be the first ever woman to finish this race, the first woman to show that it was possible. And I don't know if she'll return there again and what her future plans are with the Barkley, but her legacy will be one of an individual who believed so much in herself and knew that she could do this, and then showed up and showed the world that it could be done.
Maybe one more thing for the film that could be good is just speaking a little bit more to the preciousness of time on this course, and the fact that, for example, for you, it came down to 6 seconds. For her, it came down to 90 seconds. Is there a way to kind of link those two experiences together? Is there anything that comes to mind for you that makes you appreciate like what she was dealing with in those final moments?
Jasmine herself said she didn't really know until she got to the pavement that it was going to happen in under the allotted time. And I lived something very similar where you really, like, you're doing the math in your head with every step that you take and every book that you get, but you've been awake and moving nonstop for 2.5 days. That math is flawed. And you're just struggling to continue to inspire yourself to keep fighting. The hardest part about that last lap and the last half of the lap is you are doing your best to not lose faith. And every step that you take, you're trying to convince yourself that it's possible, and you're trying to prevent yourself from quitting. Because if you sneeze the wrong way that deep into the race, you could just quit. Like it's so fickle in that moment, because everything is saying stop. Everything is saying it's impossible, and every step that you take, you're taking one step closer to the finish, but you're trying to convince yourself with every step that it's actually going to happen before the 60-hour cutoff.